access to. Sorry, yep, I'll stop. But yeah, I
So
felt like
it has me listed as a host, and it's giving me admitting privileges.
Well, that's just a technical thing so that you can control your own camera and microphone. The rest of the people who are going to attend, what, 30, 40 people, whatever, they won't have that ability. So this just gives you that ability. So
John,
You want me to admit people, or
I'll take care of that. Don't worry.
okay?
John, can you make Courtney Williams a co-host so that she
Oh,
can
she's
be
here
able to-
now. Great. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Middle. And let me find Courtney and then I'll do
like
that.
Courtney.
Where is she? Where is Courtney?
I'm here, but I can't.
I'll make you a co-host in just a second, Courtney.
Okay.
Okay. There you are. Okay. Okay, now your co-host should be able to control your own camera and microphone. Okay. Hey.
All right,
to see
John.
you.
So I guess since it's 2 o'clock, we'll start right now, John. I think you'll be able to edit the recording as well.
Yep.
So,
The
all
recording is rolling. So
right. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our environmental justice panel during the New York State Conference on the Environment, sponsored by the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions. This is the 50th year of the New York State Association of Conservation Commissions, which was created by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation in 1972 to encourage the creation of municipal environmental and conservation advisory committees, as well as uniting them for statewide dialogues. We're joined by a very esteemed panel of individuals doing amazing work addressing historical issues in environmental justice, as well as being able to be aware of how critical this funding of the Environmental Bond Act is in terms of addressing some of those issues and the economic barriers that are preventing people from achieving the sustainable solutions that are needed in communities all across the state of New York. We are joined by the Honorable Mayor Shawyn Patterson Howard of Mount Vernon, New York, the first female elected mayor in the city of Mount Vernon's history. We also have Raya Salter, who is an energy justice attorney, as well as a representative on the New York State Climate Action Council and the founder of the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center. We also have Dr. Courtney Williams, who is a representative on the City of Peekskill's Conservation Advisory Committee and the founder of the Westchester Alliance of Sustainable Solutions, helping streamline zero waste or sustainable practices to transition away from historical waste incineration. And then we also have Dwayne Norris, who is the co-founder of Soulful Synergy and also a representative on the African American Advisory Board for the Westchester County government, who is doing great work in terms of economic empowerment and making sure residents and communities are well aligned with the emerging job opportunities for economic empowerment. So our first speaker we'll yield the floor to is the Honorable Mayor Shawyn Patterson Howard, who I will also say is also the first vice president of the African American Mayors Association, is doing work empowering mayors all across our nation. So, Madam Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. All things environmental. I just really appreciate the work that you're doing in this space and the information and the advice that you've given to me. While I'm a mayor, you've been a mentor in this environmental space. And I just want to publicly say that I totally appreciate the work that you're doing and the expertise that you are so willing to share. And so, I'm really, really excited about the state of New York focusing on this Environmental Bond Act of 2022. You're talking about $4.2 billion available to face environmental concerns throughout the state. When you look at this, when you look at what is available also through the federal government, this is not just once in a lifetime, it's once in 100 years, right? This is funding that we've never seen in our lifetimes, and our parents, and sometimes our parents' parents have not seen it. And we've talked about improving infrastructure and addressing environment and things of that nature for almost 100 years, and now we have the opportunity to do it. And while it's a great opportunity, it's also a big challenge at the same time. Why is it a big challenge? Because we've always talked about the legacy issues that we're dealing with infrastructure, with environment, wanting to make sure that we get to zero carbon emissions and things of that nature. We've spoken about how important that is to the health of our community, to the economic vitality of our community, to job development and creation in our community. But at the same time, this is historic funding is made available, we as communities, as municipalities, as organizations must make sure that we have the bandwidth, that we have the capacity, that we have the partnerships, that we're able to apply for this money and go after this money. Because the worst thing that can happen, especially to environmental justice communities right now, is that we're not prepared to get this money. The money that was really created for us is that we're not in a position that we don't always have the proper partners, that we don't have the grants writers, that we don't have the data, because these are spaces that we have not historically operated in. And so, you know, that is one of the biggest challenges for municipalities as well as for not-for-profit agencies and small businesses working in this space. One of the things, you know, I always kind of quote Jay-Z. He talks about, I have 99 problems and this ain't one of them. Well, in communities of color, we've traditionally focused on housing and crime and employment and education and, you know, health disparities. But we have not always focused on the environment because everything else was a crisis. And the environment for a lot of communities of color, especially, just seemed like something far off. Oh, you know, that, and if you can allow me to be frank today, you know, that's a white people's issue. That's about farmers. That's about people who want to save the trees and the fish. We didn't think about how major diesel emissions are increasing asthma rates and respiratory illnesses in our community. And the fact that we have highways and you know, transport centers in our communities really impact us. And so when you look at the map of communities that have environmental challenges and you put that on top of the map of communities that have health issues and low income and low education and low housing and low and high crime, it all looks the same. And so environmental issues now, probably only in the past, and I have to say for me, I've worked in human services for 30 years, and it really wasn't until about the year before I became the mayor that I really started paying attention to the environment and the intersection of environment and public health. It just wasn't something that I paid attention to. And now it is the major focus of the work that I do. And while public safety is very important in our community, in the city of Mount Vernon, we have a sewer system and a, you know, stormwater system that we are trying to deal with, which is 40% in critical condition. We're dealing with one of the highest asthma rates and respiratory disease rates in the state of New York. And so we're looking at what we need to do as a municipality, because we can't tell other people to move over to electric cars or hybrid cars if the entire city fleet is operating on diesel gas. And so we have to be the first partaker. We have to be the first example as a municipality in talking about how important improving the environment is. And so in the city of Mount Vernon, we faced our environmental challenges head on. We have a consent decree through the EPA and the Department of Justice for runoffs into the waterways that are surrounding us, that are impacting, you know, wildlife and nature. But at the same time, what no one was speaking about in the city of Mount Vernon is the same runoff that's happening into the waterways that are surrounding us are the same sewage backups that are impacting people's houses. And little girls are waking up in sewer clouds and choking and trying to breathe in the middle of the night, or people whose homes are their greatest assets are feeling like they're going to have to sell their homes because they have sewage backups and flooding issues. And so this bond act in New York State is going to go a tremendous way in being able to deal with flood mitigation, being able to improve lead service lines and remove the lead service lines and replace them. It'll have a great way to go in dealing with stormwater and wastewater and making sure that our clean water is good. And it'll also, when they're talking about forestation, we're not just looking at rural communities. in our communities, making sure that we're reducing heat islands and that we are replacing the tree canopies in our urban neighborhoods, that we're removing some of the asphalt and that we're laying grass again in our parks and our playgrounds, and that we're creating walkways and pathways and bikeways. Those things are very important because we know in urban areas that the temperatures, even if just a few degrees higher, impacts the health and the wealth and the economy of the community. And so we have to take that seriously. Mount Vernon was given $150 million to begin to address, and I say begin to address our wastewater and our stormwater, because it's going to cost at least 2 and potentially 3 times the amount of the funding that we've received so far. And while that is a major issue, we are also looking at every single one of our public parks and our open spaces. We're looking at our city fleet of vehicles. We are looking at how we can address reducing carbon emissions even from our public municipal buildings. We're working with our residents and having them look at solar. We're looking at EV charging stations throughout our community. So from a municipal standpoint, it's hard for us to hold residents and businesses accountable until we as a municipality can show the way to go by being the example. We have to look at a lot of the flooding that's happening. Everyone keeps saying, oh, Ida was a once in a generation event. And now you're hearing this is the 100-year storm every other week, right? And so we have to harden our infrastructure, our electric grids. We just have to make sure our communities are prepared, because as EJ communities, as we look to improve home ownership, and like I said before, that's the greatest asset that a lot of people have in communities of color. And flooding causes one of the greatest risks to those homes, and it impacts the economy and it impacts the fiscal stability of those communities. Most communities will never have the amount of money through tax dollars or even through bonding to address these legacy issues that have been growing over the last 50 years in a lot of our communities. And so we have to make sure that we're prepared to apply for this money. We have to partner with one another in our regions versus compete, because these are regional issues. They're just not individual city issues, but they're regional issues. If you build a storm wall in the community above me and I don't have a storm wall in my community, it's just going to devastate us. So we have to look at regional solutions. We have to look at extending our partnerships and being very strategic at how we increase our bandwidth and our capacity to apply for the monies on the state level, and then even the open competitive monies that are not coming to the state, but are available at the federal level. Right now, you'll see it says Patriot Strategies behind me because I'm on vacation this week, right? But while I was on vacation, I said, bring a dress and see if you can get appointments. And so yesterday I met with the EPA. Today I met with Mitch Landrieu and some of his team. And after this meeting, we're going to the Department of Transportation and we'll be meeting with Buttigieg and his team. And so, you know, it's very important that we are building relationships and building our profile as small cities and towns and villages, because we don't have the same profile as your large 1 million plus cities. They have all of the media attention. And in our smaller communities, we have to come together so that we could raise our profile and that we can coordinate and collaborate and go after some of these monies that are coming from not just the state, but the federal level at the same time. Competition is nice, but the pie is only but so big, and you can only cut it up so much. And you won't get a sufficient piece if you try and go it alone. We can go further, faster if we go together. And I'm just looking for partners who are willing to be part of that work so that we can bring the resources to our communities.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor, and thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us for this conference. As I mentioned before, you are the only mayor that we have listed as a speaker during our 50th conference, our conference for the 50th annual anniversary of the New York State Association Conservation Commission. So we appreciate your steadfast leadership addressing historical issues in Mount Vernon and going above and beyond, whether it's through the African American Mayor Association, where you serve as a national first vice president, or speaking up on other mayoral issues that may be happening throughout the state of New York. I will quickly plug in that my co-moderator, John Rhodes, who's helping with the tech behind the scenes, is the chair of the Mount Kisco Conservation Advisory Committee. And we created an environmental justice forum for NISAD so that we could be able to start aggregating environmental justice issues throughout the state of New York, whether it's rural, urban, or suburban communities, so that we could help with the creation of those regional coalitions. So we will be happy with being transparent with what we get with you so that we could see if you have any potential allies that are having similar issues, whether if it's in Allegheny County, St. Lawrence County, Chautauqua County. It's important that we know that people, even though that you might live apart, you are facing similar issues. So we'll be happy to share that with you, Madam Mayor.
And just as I leave, since I am the only mayor on here, I need for you to know, as different environmental agencies and businesses who are operating in environmental space, please make sure that you're approaching and being insistent, persistent, and consistent in approaching your municipal leaders and speaking to them about the environmental issues. Yes, public safety and things of that nature are important, but oftentimes when leaders don't understand an issue, they don't want you to know how much they don't understand. And so it really right now is incumbent upon you to lift up your voice as the experts in the room and help your leaders, oftentimes who might feel very insufficient in this space, to become experts and understand the importance of your partnership and the information that you have, and that they need to be at the table with you in addressing these issues in the community. And that's what Paul, that's what FC, WC, Sustainable Westchester, and some of our local organizations around environment have done. And they've definitely helped to grow me up in this space much quicker than I would have ever been able to do without them. I would have been overwhelmed and sitting in a corner, really feeling forlorn if I had to go and address these Herculean challenges by myself. But they have been the wind beneath my wings, so thank you. And please know your value, and I think your municipal leaders understand your value. They're just not always going to be the first to approach you because they want to seem like they're leaders and experts in everything. But what I do know now is that I have more questions than I have answers. And with that, I'm going to go out and find the answers that I need to do the work that I need to do for my constituents. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your leadership, Madam Mayor. We're all in this together. Yes, that we are. And speaking of subject matter experts, we do have Raya Salter that's with us from the New York State Climate Action Council. She's appointed to that post by New York State Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, as well as the founder of the Energy Justice Law and Policy Center. Raya, I know you spoke on a panel earlier today, but we do appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us and provide any insight of what we can be doing to empower our communities with the Environmental Bond Act as a ballot referendum in November.
Thank you so much, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. I just want to say, I mean, obviously, Paul, your leadership is tremendous. Madam Mayor Shawyn, I kind of said all of the things. That was just really a tremendous presentation and connecting the dots for everybody, in both the opportunities and the challenges. So just thank you so much for that. And absolutely, the Energy Justice Policy Center is one of those groups that wants to work in partnership with you in these regional approaches as we try to bring the solutions and not compete for this once in a generation, once in a lifetime funds, hopefully area of abundance if we can only capture it. I think I want to come at it from the more of that, the activist and the community-based organization perspective in my remarks. Absolutely everybody support the Environmental Bond Act. It is all the things that we need and we want to support it. But I want to just give some context, a little bit of context about it. So the Environmental Bond Act is something that's been on the table for a long time, and rightfully so. But this focus on quote unquote environmental justice communities or disadvantaged communities was really a more recent affair. And why? The Environmental Bond Act has been, put, like I said, put on the table by a lot of different folks for a long time. But it was only in 2019 when we passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that included a lot of important environmental and climate justice provisions that we see this pivot to environmental justice in the Bond Act. And why? One of the things that the Climate Act in 2019 required was that a goal of 40% and no less than 35% of the benefits of the state's climate spending must go to so-called quote unquote disadvantaged communities. And that was ultimately picked up on a federal level because our state action was state and local action. I'm telling folks, is always the number one most powerful thing that you can do. It was picked up by the Biden administration in what they call the Justice 40 initiative. And so they have a similar in the executive branch, a similar, not the same mandate to focus at least 40% of funds to quote unquote disadvantaged communities. There's a lot to say about how that's playing out, but I bring that up because it was an important intervention. So it was after the CLCPA was passed that a lot of the advocates started saying everywhere, as we should, anywhere where the state is spending money, you need to have this 35, the law, it's annoying. We want to say just 40%. The law says a goal of 40%, but no less than 35%. We want to see that everywhere. And we also want to see that in the Environmental Bond Act too. And, you know, we've seen a lot of success in that in terms of looking at benefit in terms of at least a portion of dollars spent. So you see that mandate now in the Environmental Bond Act. And the reason I want to uplift that is because it is a relatively recent pivot, and the state and federal governments are still working to figure out what does quote unquote benefit mean to quote unquote disadvantaged communities, you know, in the context of the Bond Act, in the context, frankly, of a lot of spending. And that's true of the feds and the state in terms of who is a disadvantaged communities. The criteria are different at the state level and at the federal level. I could speak another time. You know, I think we've really got a best example in New York State of how that definition was created, because our law required environmental justice advocates to be the ones developing that criteria. And so we've developed that criteria, and we have included, as we figured out, you know, who, Union Turnpike, who is a disadvantaged community. There are things, race is an indicator, historical underinvestment is an indicator. So we've got a strong definition of disadvantaged communities, but this pivot in the Bond Act in terms of who's going to benefit and exactly how is still something that's being worked out. And so I want to, and that's true in that there's been a lot of pre-existing planning for this Bond Act in terms of what it was going to do and who it was going to benefit. And it's part of this ongoing struggle, for lack of a better word, to, you know, we've had disinvestment in frontline communities. And so this is part of that ongoing struggle to make sure that we have investment, even now as the law requires. And so one of the things that I know I've been focused on in my local community with my other local activists is how can we make sure that communities are at the table when these decisions are made? How can we make sure that we have a role in helping say what a benefit is? Because there's a, you know, and how can we, to Mayor Shawyn's points, make sure that our communities, our municipalities, our community-based organizations are in a position to take advantage of these funds. And it's so critically important because, as Mayor Shawyn says, this is really a once in a generation opportunity. The Bond Act itself, you know, it's been a long time since we've had this type of investment that's needed in you know, in these environmental concerns, but the federal money is the largest investment in climate that's ever been made in the United States. It's not the Green New Deal that we, you know, that we would have liked and hoped for. There are a lot of things that are negative about it, but the New York State Climate Action Council, at the last meeting, the state's analysis said that up to $70 billion of incentives and benefits can come to New Yorkers between now and 2050, just from the federal bill alone. So, you know, as Mayor Shawyn said, we have to be thinking about this Bond Act as a piece of that. There are a lot of pieces that need to come together, but unless we do come together in partnership and also demanding that our officials have our voices at the table. And by our voices, we mean our people in our towns and cities, no matter what language you speak, no matter whether you're a citizen or not. We need to have a broader engagement so we can have a role in how this is going to be spent. Because as I mentioned, there's very open questions in terms of who's going to get to benefit from this money, what those quote unquote beneficial projects look like. And there are a lot of forces that can double down to sort of reinforce existing patterns of inequality in terms of who gets money and how it's spent. And we could end up in a position where this once in a lifetime opportunity has gone by us in terms of a real chance to revitalize our communities, clean them up, restore our environment, change the trajectory of harm from energy systems and other environmental efforts. So I will end there, but thank you so much. I'll turn it back to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Raya, for taking time out of your schedule to join us. All of you, Raya is an invaluable asset to the state of New York and also locally to the city of New Rochelle, where she has been a moral compass in terms of making sure that we are holding our conversations morally right through the lens of equity and making sure we're uplifting people that historically have been disenfranchised from being able to participate in conversations such as this. Raya recently has been persevering attacks on social media as well too, because her steadfast leadership in congressional testimonies where she's, engaging people that are in federal government and that are completely embedded in climate denialism and are being unaware of the systematic harm that our environmental infrastructure is having on communities of color and low-income communities. So Ryan, we do thank you for your leadership at a multidimensional level. I would say it like that because what you're doing really is paving the way, especially for young people such as Dwayne Norris and I who are entering into this climate space. With that being said, I will give the floor to you, Dwayne, as the co-founder of Soulful Synergy and the Chief Operating Officer. Dwayne is also an invaluable asset towards empowering young African-American men as a member of the African-American Advisory Board for the Westchester County government and has been doing a lot of work in terms of economic empowerment to go above and beyond of a long-term sustainability strategy for people to be invested in the rehabilitation of our communities. So Dwayne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Audio's okay? All right, awesome. Tough to follow these two ladies, man. Powerhouse, so much full of knowledge, and I continue to learn from both of you. So Mayor Shawyn, Raya truly inspire me, and very happy to be on this panel with you both and with you as well, Courtney. As Paul said, Soulful Synergy has been working in this space for a number of years, trying to help bring our vantage point to the clean energy and the environmental sector. So I'll share a little bit about that. I just want to say thank you, Paul, and thank you, John, and the entire Nightside group for having us here. So Soulful Synergy was created in 2013 by my best friend and I, Alejandro Alvarez, for us to be a part of the change that we wanted to see. We wanted to see our communities empowered. We wanted to see our communities thriving. And we wanted to break down these silo effects that we often see in communities where resources are kind of hoarded sometimes by large organizations, very harder for small organizations to thrive. Sometimes there's a disconnect between what the government is doing and what the community needs are, or even what the community understands. And how do you kind of bridge that gap and create these public-private partnerships and collaborations that really are for the community good and that really do create the outcomes that the community needs. And so that's been a lot of our work over the last 8 years, 9 years, is really trying to figure out how do we create these collaborations that are synergistic and that create hopefully great outcomes. We have been fortunate to work on some projects that have allowed us to really kind of manifest our vision. One of those projects is our Clean Energy Academy, which I'll talk about, which is so much in line with the Environmental Bond Act, so much in line with the CLCPA, so much in line with the Justice 40 initiative. That is set to unleash. I think we talked about this term before all the panelists came on, but it's going to unleash a lot of money into our communities for clean energy initiatives, whether it's for water, for waste, for air, and for energy. And we need to be at the forefront of those. Environmental justice communities, disadvantaged communities, disenfranchised communities, whatever term you feel like using, need to have a stake in how those funds are being dispersed, as Raya said. And in order to do that, we have to be aware of them and we have to be skilled enough to be able to act on the opportunities as they come. So if you have hundreds of millions, billions, and at the federal level, probably trillions of dollars being allocated and earmarked to communities that have historically been disenfranchised and not had a say in how environmental issues should be addressed in their neighborhoods, then they should have a say now. And so if you're having work done, some of the things I'm going to advocate for, Raya, is I know that you are, I may have dropped off, but I'll say it in general, as I know that you're working on the Climate Action Council, is that there is mandates for contractors. So if all this money is coming in to do energy retrofits, to do green roofs, to do solar, to do community garden spaces, anything that's needed to be done in terms of infrastructure, that there are mandates on prime contractors being MWBEs with a focus on the M. That minority contractors have an opportunity to be primes, not just subs on some of these contracts, and that there's also a local hiring initiative, that there's either mandates or requirements that a certain number of participants who are working on these projects are local hires. I mean, I think that's the way that we're going to continue to make sure that the funding that's being released into these communities, that 35 to 40% actually stays in those communities and benefits the people who are there so that they can improve not just the health and quality of their life through the environmental upgrades and things that are happening, but also through the economic benefits that are there. And so our Clean Energy Academy really has been at the forefront of that for the last few years. We've been running a number of workforce training programs. We're very fortunate that NYSERDA has been at the forefront of funding workforce development. They didn't wait for all the funding to be released for them to say that they're going to take a concerted effort to provide funding for workforce training. So they provided our funding for about 1,200 workers over the next few years. We've trained about 450 so far. So NYSERDA, being a large funder of a few $1 million to our training program, has enabled us to really be targeted in who we train and making sure that we're inviting and connecting with communities of color to enroll them into our program and make sure that they have the skills to participate in this clean energy revolution. And so what that looks like for us is making sure that they have the skills to be able to understand energy efficiency and clean energy options, that they understand the different systems that we're looking at: lighting, HVAC, heating, hot water, air source heat pumps, solar, electric vehicles, that they have the skill set for being able to audit those buildings or those energy systems, that they have the skill sets to be able to install those systems, to maintain those systems, and really be a part of that economic engine that's going to spur. There's a lot coming, and it's difficult to really know exactly how the state is going to allocate these resources, and that's where I think all of us need to play our part. So as Raya said, November 8th, Environmental Bond Act is going to be on the ballot. We need to make sure that we have a say in making sure that that legislation gets passed. Then there's still a say in how these funds get allocated, and we need to make sure that we're at the forefront of giving the state guidelines and recommendations of how those funds are dispersed to communities so that they can have, again, a say in their own environmental and economic future. So as we continue to push forward our objectives and our initiatives around clean energy training and workforce development, we want to make sure that we're partnering with all of you to make that as real as it can be. I'll say a few unique things about our program, and I'll invite you all to visit the website to apply, but we have free training programs for anybody looking to get involved in the clean energy space. I highly recommend, if you know someone who's looking to advance their career in that space or transition into that space from a different career pathway, that they go to cleanenergyacademy.org, cleanenergyacademy.org. Again, we have free training programs on lighting efficiency, HVACs, heat pumps, heating and hot water. And we are focused on teaching folks the principles around these systems, how they operate, how they function, teaching them the energy conservation measures that are needed, teaching them about the local laws and policies and market drivers that are really dictating the market, and then helping them to understand the incentive programs. Through Con Edison, through NYSERDA and others, there's a lot of funding available to building owners to be able to retrofit their buildings at discounted rates, helping them to calculate the savings, calculate the carbon emission reduction strategies, calculate the cost payback. And that program is something that, again, is free to participants, not just to enroll in, but also to take advantage of our workforce and job placement services. We're fortunate to have a partnership with Willdan Energy Solutions as well as Con Edison. And those two partners give us a lot of insight into how the market is, really making sure that our curriculum is market aligned, that we understand what are the right softwares, the tools, the calculators, and the skill sets that our students and graduates need in order to be successful in this workspace. But they also give us connectivity to the job market. Literally hundreds of subcontractors that work with Willdan and Con Edison on their small medium business program, their multifamily energy efficiency program, and the clean heat program come to us to look to hire from our graduate pool. And so that's a huge value add for us to be able to provide to anyone looking to transition or upskill into this space. We provide workshops and job placement assistance on career road mapping, resume support, cover letters, interview preparation, and helping make direct connections to employers. We help to leverage different incentives that are available from the state to also incentivize employers to hire, where they can hire individuals and have part of their salary reimbursed or covered. And that's a huge opportunity for employers to be able to onboard somebody from a disadvantaged community and take advantage of those subsidy programs. And so very, very much invite all of you to join us in this effort to really make sure that communities of color, disadvantaged communities, disenfranchised communities have a stake in the clean energy future that's rolling out over the next decade plus. So thank you, Paul, and everyone for allowing me to be here, and look forward to any questions that come.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. Thank you for the work that you're doing. As I mentioned numerous times, the work that you're doing and Soulful Synergy, I see Alejandro Alvarez is here in the audience as well too. It really is second to none in regards to making sure that we are having these conversations of economic empowerment as we look about the sustainable development in our communities that have been historically been overlooked through environmental conversations. It's important because we're looking at how we can make sure people are well equipped to properly fund our school districts. They're properly equipped to handle the trials and tribulations, what it means to be an adult in 2022 America with rising costs of living, and making sure that people are aware of emerging job markets can be aligned to be able to achieve those job positions when those jobs are made available. And I also would like to give a shout out to Mr. Charles Calloway, who joined us. He is the Director of Workforce Development for the West Harlem Environmental Action Network, Environmental Action. So the work that they're doing at We Act and what Dwayne is doing, they're definitely helping lead the trajectory of what workforce development would look like in the future. So our next speaker, our last but not least speaker is Dr. Courtney Williams, who is of the Peekskill Environmental Advisory Council, Conservation Advisory Council. She is also the founder of the Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions, which is a growing coalition of volunteer members of the environmental community looking to transition away from our waste incineration management of our solid waste system. Courtney is also very much equipped. She has a background as a senior staff scientist at Regeneron, where she is leading the oncology and angiogenesis group. Oncology is the study of cancer, and angiogenesis is the study of the formation of new blood vessels. I used to be a nursing major, so I do remember that. Dr. Williams, the floor is yours, and please let me know if I had the wrong definition of angiogenesis.
No, you got it right. I am, of course, speaking today wearing my CAC and WAS hats and not my Regeneron hat, just to be clear. But thank you, Paul, and thanks for inviting me and your work with WAS as well. I really appreciate it. So yeah, my name is Courtney Williams. My day job that pays the bills is cancer research, but I do a lot of environmental justice work to survive, right? So I live in Peekskill. I got my start doing this work fighting the Algonquin pipeline expansion under Indian Point nuclear power plant. We lost that fight, so we now have 3 high pressure fracked gas pipelines running under Indian Point nuclear power plant. But after losing that fight, during that fight, I really realized the seemingly insurmountable environmental odds that Peekskill is up against. And I got to know my community through that work and really, kind of doubled down to fight for it. I joined the Conservation Advisory Council for the city of Peekskill, and more recently, in order to help really move the needle on trash incineration, I founded Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions, and we have several Alliance members and folks we've worked with on this call. So as a CAC, we've, in EJ community, we've had a successful solarized Peekskill campaign with Sustainable Westchester. We've built some EV charging stations. We're, working with other groups to pilot clean public transportation initiatives, monitor our water quality. Dwayne and Soulful Synergy are very active in Peekskill. I worked with him to put together an info session for employees of Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. The plant is shutting down. So we held that to offer them retraining opportunities. So we're doing a lot of those things, but they're really in some ways personal steps, individual steps that people can take, but we're confronting a systemic problem. Like, it's not a problem of individuals and their personal choices. It's a problem of the systems we've created to generate power, to manage our waste, et cetera. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to keep my focus on, is not worry about, do individuals compost, but how do we make it so that our waste stream is designed so that everybody's food scraps get recycled? And, I think Peekskill faces many of the same problems as Yonkers and Mount Vernon, which is we are a majority minority community. And so a lot of polluting infrastructure is sited there. So, Peekskill, for instance, we have a county sewage treatment plant. On our border is Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant and the 40 years of irradiated spent fuel stored there on top of those gas pipelines. We have those gas pipelines. We have a gypsum plant, and we have the trash incinerator. Wheelabrator Trash Incinerator burns most of Westchester County's trash. And it is the largest single source of air pollution in Westchester County. And I know, not to be just Westchester focused, but New York State as a whole, we lead the nation. We're tied with Florida for the number of trash incinerators in our state. And unfortunately, when our draft scoping plan came out, it did not discuss a movement away from trash incineration. So this, I'm sure that others of you on this call live near a trash incinerator. And as was mentioned earlier, the health impacts of this are profound. And our, the New York State Health Equity Report that Paul actually was the one who sent me a copy of, outlines the undue burden that Peekskill is facing. So I think that we need to be working as a state to move away from trash incineration and, make sure we enact really rigorous extended producer responsibility laws, that we have right to repair laws, and these other things that will allow us to stop making waste in the first place. Because let's be clear, recycling is not getting us out of this, right? Plastics are made by the fossil fuel industry. So if you want to get off fossil fuels, that means getting off plastic. And I do think that we really are, I think Peekskill is emblematic of a problem. I was working on a grant application recently and realized that 4 of the richest 20 towns in the entire United States send their garbage to Peekskill to be burned. There's a reason for that, right? We are a poor community and we are a majority minority community. That is the environmental racism that allowed these rich white places to send their garbage to be burned in this poor Black and brown community. And we are faced with the catch-22. And I think this was mentioned by speakers earlier, which is that prior to now, a lot of that climate funding, you had to, you couldn't get the money unless you had the staff, and you couldn't get the staff without the money. And that's really where Peekskill remains today. Like, we haven't been able to become a climate smart community because we don't have money to hire a sustainability task force, a sustainability coordinator, but we can't get money to hire a sustainability coordinator unless we get that funding. And so I do think the disadvantaged communities criteria and devoting 40% of that funding, climate funding, to disadvantaged communities is important. And I don't need to keep talking, but I would love to ask the first question of the Q&A part and ask it of Raya Salter, my fellow panelist. I was on the previous panel when you mentioned you weren't able to get into the rollout of the disadvantaged communities criteria. And I would love to hear more about that, because for the city of Peekskill, if we got a chunk of that funding, but we had to put it towards waste management, we'd basically be bailing out, Scarsdale and Larchmont and Chappaqua and Pound Ridge, so that, they could spend money on their, like, whatever BMW and Tesla chargers, and we'd be stuck using our piece of the pie to not get asthma from burning their trash. So I'd love to hear more about, is there a way to make those criteria such that we know that we're not forcing disadvantaged communities to spend their piece of the pie on solving problems generated by folks that qualify for the other 60%.
So Dr. Williams, Raya Salter did drop off, but I will make sure that's noted, and you and Raya are connected, so you could be
Yep.
you could start having that conversation. But that is an interesting, that definitely would provide a lot of insight as well too. That answer for everyone here. But I guess at this moment of the program, does anyone else have a question they would like to have asked to any of our panelists? I would say that, working with as a volunteering with the Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions has been eye-opening for me, so that I can make sure that during the limited time I have during my human experience extracurricularly, I could make sure that I'm doing what is rightfully and morally right that needs to be addressed. Because if you look at the emissions report, and it's obviously bigger than Wheelabrator, it's the other emissions that throughout the United States of America. But the fact that we have over 580 million pounds of hazardous materials and COT going into the air every year, and you look at these, you could Google search the repercussions of these airborne products. It definitely does make sure that there should be a sense of urgency of conversation and what we could do to steer away from that. I do see Tanya Dwyer has her hand raised. Tanya, you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you for all of that information, everyone. I really appreciate it. I come at all justice issues from a housing perspective. And so I wonder if we can look at this with a zoning framework, because the difference I see between Peekskill and Chappaqua is that Chappaqua is zoned in such a way that they cannot have incinerators, and Peekskill is zoned to have the incinerators and block us off from all the amenities and benefits of living in a town like Chappaqua. And until our municipalities in Westchester and frankly the whole country really look at our zoning laws and see how inequitable they are, Peekskill will continue to be the place where these terrible facilities are built, because most of the municipalities in Westchester do not allow them just by zoning laws.
Agreed. I think, Mayor Patterson touched on this in the past, which is like, communities focus on economic development, jobs, et cetera. And a lot of times that the pitch that like, oh, this is going to bring jobs to your community gets disadvantaged communities to sacrifice their health and well-being in exchange for jobs. And that is kind of what happened to bring Wheelabrator to Peekskill. And I'm sure has happened throughout the state for community, like rural communities that are disadvantaged and are looking for these jobs. And I think, I do think that communities could use zoning as one approach to try and block that. I think for communities like ours, where it's already there, suddenly changing the zoning law and kicking them out might be harder. I'd be interested to hear more from you about the potential of that. But I think, we've got this opportunity now with the client CLCPA, like let's use it and just say no more trash incineration and put in place a way to shut the existing ones down and stop building new ones. And whether you call them incinerators or waste to energy or special magical recycling facilities, like the industry comes up with all kinds of names, but it's the same thing. And we should just draw the line and say, we're not going to sacrifice people's health to burn your garbage.
Well, I'll just say one thing to that, Courtney. When communities gentrify, the standards go up. And I firmly believe that Wheelabrator, AKA Wind Waste, will, if Peekskill is gentrified to the point that communities in Brooklyn were, they will change their standards. They've done it in other communities across the country. They choose not to do it for us because we don't have the political pull to get it done right now. But even if they're grandfathered in, we can raise their standards.
Agreed.
Thank you. So our next question, I guess this will be our last question, just for the interest of time. We have Charles Calloway, Director of Workforce Development for West Harlem Environmental Action.
Yeah, and I guess it's more of a statement than a question. Before becoming the Workforce Development Director, I was a community organizer at We Act, and we ran a campaign of take your fair share. Not one community should be burdened with all the polluting facilities. And I think the campaign should be, understanding that, and as Tanya said, yeah, they lift the standards when the community gets gentrified. So I think the campaign should be, everyone should take their fair share of polluting facilities. And we ran a campaign on that. We got the Marine Transfer Station from the west side moved over to the mayor's mansion. So, you really got to, and it may be a state situation because that's environmental racism. They put these incinerators in Black and brown communities and they zone for that, right? But it's more of a, trying to figure out how do we run a campaign of take your fair share. The CLCPA should actually be talking about that, and it does a little bit of that work.
Yeah, so as wearing my hat as a member of the Peekskill Conservation Advisory Council, and then actually Tanya in her role as a volunteer with WAS, we submitted on complimentary comments on the disadvantaged communities criteria to ask them to include a characterization of the polluting infrastructure to see who's doing the polluting. Is this a county or state or municipal facility that another community chose to site in a disadvantaged community so as to protect themselves from the environmental burden and put that burden on the disadvantaged community, so that we would have a metric. So when the advantaged community sought funding, that a portion of their funding could be shunted to the disadvantaged community to address whatever burden was put there, to so not just figuratively pay your fair share, but literally cough up a portion of your climate funding to pay it off to address the environmental harms that you've been doing on a disadvantaged community.
Thank you. Oh, Charles, did you have something you wanted to follow
Yeah,
up?
that's brilliant. I mean, that's brilliant. And hopefully it's more of a breakdown of, 70% goes to the disadvantaged community and 25% goes to the advantaged community, right? That's brilliant.
Well, thank you all. We have elapsed our time for this panel. Oh yeah, Dwayne, did you want to add something? Of course, yes. Mhm.
It was mainly just to answer any questions that were in the chat. As I saw a couple, I just wanted to make sure that I did address them, if that's okay. I tried in the chat, but just know that the classes are virtual, and we in person pre-pandemic pivoted to virtual because of the pandemic, but have chosen not to go back to in person because it allows us a lot of accessibility. By training this class virtually, we're able to reach all different parts of the state, so everything up to Binghamton and Syracuse and above. And it's also accessible for people who have limited childcare access or limited travel access, or don't have the resources to buy out food when they travel. You have to buy lunch out. It's made it for a really dynamic program. We've had to do some things to make it as captivating virtually as it would be in person, but it's also allowed us to reach a lot farther than we would have had we not had the requirement. The COVID had enforced us to go virtual. So that question was in the chat, and I just wanted to make sure I shared that. And John, I think you had a question, and my answer is yes, it would work well with another workforce program. But we like to think of ourselves almost as maybe the next stage of a bridge program. So if someone's doing very core fundamental professional development work, or basic kind of safety work, or construction safety, or introduction to clean energy, we can be that next step sometimes for them, or vice versa. Sometimes we're the first step, and then we send them to our university partners for further education. So definitely we love to work collaboratively. And I'm thankful that I've been able to work collaboratively with every single person on this panel, from Courtney, she mentioned, the work in Peekskill, to Raya, to the mayor, to Paul, even my man Charles. So this is the collaboration that we enjoy, and let's keep working together.
Thank you so much, Dwayne. And yes, this is just the beginning of these conversations we will be having. John Rhodes and I have created an environmental justice forum where we're going to be aggregating issues from municipalities throughout the state of New York. And we hope to be able to leverage that information to help create the needed strategic partnerships so that we can know that while we're addressing these issues and they may seem like a Goliath or monumental, we do have other partners that will be able to help address these issues shoulder to shoulder with each other. With that being said, thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Mayor Shawyn Patterson Howard. And thank you, Raya Salter. And also John Rhodes, who is also my colleague on the board of directors of NISAC and the chair of the Mount Kisco Conservation Advisory Committees for helping everything run smoothly in the backgrounds, admitting people and helping bump questions as well to me too. Thank you, John. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to join us for this important panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Great job.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Courtney. I catch up with you. Thank you, Ann. I don't know if
Thanks
you can
all.
unmute yourself, but nice to see you, Ann. Thank you so much.
Oh, great panel. Oh my God, great panel, guys. Thanks. Beautiful panel.
I'm looking forward to connecting. Please send me the invites.
You bet. All coming to you. All coming. Yep, you bet.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good
Great
job.
afternoon.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you,
Yeah.
panelists, Courtney and Raya. And oh my God, great panel. So cool. Oh my God, did you hear that?
I heard